Hello, my name is Diana DeWinton. Today I'd like to speak to you a little bit about working with animals, a special area I feel I love working in. I think I started to be aware of animals relative to attunement when my father, Roger DeWinton, we were living here on Sunrise, and from time to time, when there was a need in our animal population on the ranch down at the farm, the person in charge of the farm would call my dad up and say, "We've got a need down at the farm," and he'd go down and share attunement, and a while later he'd return, and that was that. But it pricked my ears up, and one day, years later, a friend of mine came to me. She was working in our accounting department, and she said, "My horse is here on the ranch, and she's having problems, and I wondered if you would take a look at her and see if you can help her." And I found out that Tika was the name of the horse. She was a big pinto horse, lots of brown and white on her. And I heard that the condition she had was a thing called canker. So Cindy, her owner, I said to Cindy, this was my first chance at this. I hadn't really ever thought about it before. I said, "Cindy, would you be there for the first time when I share an attunement with Tika?" And I just felt like the agreement between the horse and the owner was important for the horse to feel at home, relaxed. I wouldn't be so much of a stranger, perhaps, to her. So this happened, and she put a halter on the horse, and the horse was standing opposite me, and I went up and I said hello and just talked normal to her, accepting her in her beauty just the way she was, not trying to make anything grand or less, but a beautiful animal in the kingdom of the world we work with together. We were here to steward, as human beings, steward the earth. But the animals play a part in stewarding the earth as well, in my view. So we were going to work together, again, in this beautiful word of agreement. So again, I didn't have any specific technique or plan. No one had trained me on horses or any animal for that matter. So I just raised my hand and envisioned balancing her cervicals. And she was standing about 10 feet away from me, and Cindy was right there holding the halter just gently, and she was standing there. So I worked for a little while, and I could feel an equal strength of current, attunement current in both hands. And then something changed, and she started walking toward me. And Cindy just let her walk. She kept coming closer and closer, and suddenly she was literally this close. And then her head went around and came over the other side of my shoulder. And I said to Cindy quietly, almost, I wasn't clenching my teeth. I didn't want to move and suddenly shift things, because I didn't know what she was thinking. In one sense, I felt she was thinking. And Cindy said, "She's giving you a hug." I thought, oh, my goodness. And suddenly this outflow of love between us, and the outflow from her, it was palpable. Anyway, so we would get together every couple of days as we worked with her condition called canker. It was on one of her back hoofs underneath, where the flesh is soft and tender. And of course, she was walking on it every 4 steps or 3 steps. She was walking on this, and she was limping rather heavily. Well, gradually, as we shared attunement with her, I noticed that in the beginning of an attunement, she'd be limping. Every time she walked towards me, we got to really know one another. I'd call her across the field, and she'd come hobbling towards me. Well, by the time the end of the attunement came that day, she was walking more steadily and more evenly. Her gait was beginning to settle out. we spent about a month, every day for a while and then every other day, just sharing attunement for 20 minutes, half an hour. And she began to really get comfortable. There were other horses on the ranch as well. And this was really interesting because I could feel something larger happening as the other horses started gathering around. And they would stand, there were 3 of them, they'd stand almost like in an equilateral triangle around Tika, cock the same foot that was the one that was injured, and it was like they were adding to the attunement. They were working in agreement together, and the stillness and the quietude that would happen amongst the 4 of us. I guess I made the 5th. Anyway, it was just beautiful. The silence, the depth of the feel of the actual attunement current get richer and richer. And when the time came, we'd end and disperse. So Cindy decided she wanted to have Tika checked out. So she took her to the vet hospital in Fort Collins and to have her checked out, because the thought was maybe we could have a little operation and the canker could be taken out of the foot. Anyway, when the appointment was done, the doctor looked at the hoof and said, "There's only a tiny little thing here." He took his knife and lifted it out, and it was gone. And I can remember when I heard the story, I just, first of all, it was a little overwhelming because I've never experienced this before, and I go, ooh, the power of attunement. And it made me realize that one can work in agreement on many different ways, on all different kinds of levels. And the assistance in this case of the other 3 horses was very much a part of that mix. And all I could do was simply give deep thanks to Source for this experience.
So Diana, I've known you for many years. And I remember when I first met you, you told me about a bull who you helped, and I believe his name was Max. Can you tell me about it? Like, tell me all. Tell me about the healing that took place, the relationship, all that.
Mm-hmm. Well, one day, I don't know, probably about 7 or 8 years ago, one of the guys who worked with the farm animals came up to me and said, "Diana, we have a bull that won't get up off the ground. He just is lying on the ground. And we've been working with him and giving him treats. He's gone to the vet and so on. And I'm just wondering if attunement might work with him too." And my red lights and green lights went off, and I thought, oh yeah, I remember my dad telling me he's going down to the barnyard to work on such and such an animal. And my thought went, okay, if he can do it, I'll do it. I hadn't done much with working with animals at that point. So together, again, like I was saying before, the owner with the animal, the person who knows the animal well, it's useful to have them there in the very beginning so that the animal can receive this other person they haven't met before. We don't know how jittery they are among human beings. Just, there's just a lot that can happen in that very first instance. You want to make it as easy as possible for the animal. So I asked them if they wouldn't mind coming down with me, and we did. We walked down across the field, and the guy laid some treats out for the, just sort of help get this relationship working, and treats were on the ground, and we were walking towards Max, and he had his back to me, head over here, and looking the other direction. And then he heard a rustle of us coming, and he turned his head, And when our eyes met, I almost fell on the ground because there was just a current of connection, of love between the two of us. And, I just had never felt that before, just caught my breath. So I came up behind him, he was still on the ground, and something said, here he's this great big 1,500-pound bull. I just said, come on, Max, let's get up. And I started pushing on his back. You can do it, boy. And so we just kept encouraging him. Come on, boy. And before we knew it, he was standing up. And so then I went around to his front, facing him, and I just started sharing an attunement. My understanding was he had some weakness or problem right at the top of his hoof, where the hoof goes into the leg, both the front legs. And so I just, stood, bounced him around the head to begin with, and then returned down to the ankles and worked with him. And he seemed to be doing just fine. And we worked for a while, and then I felt that was enough at a certain point, and so we left it at that. And so I'd go down and visit him, and he'd be moved around the different fields as the cows were grazing, the grasses and so on. And we had a beautiful relationship. We also had a relationship that played games with one another. And one day, I remember going down, and he was in amongst a herd of about 40 or 50 cattle. And I looked at this sea of cattle, and I couldn't find him. And he was bigger than all the rest of them, but he wasn't. So finally I said, Max, where are you? And this great big head came up over the top of the animals. I said, you come on over here. We need to share an attunement. So he elbowed his way through this herd of 40 animals, came and placed his feet. He knew. He placed his feet right in front of me. And so we worked again, and it was just this chuckle. I could tell we were both laughing about what happened there, because it was very deliberate on his part. He had hidden behind. I mean, they know how to play games, don't they? Mm-hmm. And that's part of it. The joy of just taking the moment the way it's working and having fun with it.
Right.
So we shared an attunement. And Max was around for a couple of years, but this condition that he had was, I think, hereditary. And so at one point there was a turn for him, and we needed to let him go because he was struggling. And so he was given a very beautiful departure with the team of the animals, and I spent a little bit of time with him, giving him apples, and he knew this was his time, and it was a beautiful completion. And he'd done what he'd done. He'd fathered many a beautiful little animal. So I give thanks for the creature I knew as Max. He was a beautiful, strong expression of spirit through the cattle.
Wow, what a cool story.
Yeah.
Thank you for sharing that.
You're welcome.